Stand by to initiate release sequencer. On my mark. 5.
We're on express elevator to hell. Going down.
2. 1. Mark.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mark, a.k.a. Derringer. Today is Sunday, June 17th, and you are listening to episode 161 of the Instant Action Podcast, your weekly source for Planetside news and information. As always, I'm brought to you by great listeners like you via the Support the Show tab on instantactionpodcast.com. Speaking of that Support the Show tab, it's been a while since I've done a request for people to use my different links and stuff, but I do want to remind everybody that if you do go to instantactionpodcast.com and hit that Support the Show link, that you're going to see a number of different ways that you can support the show. Option 1 is to use my Amazon.com link to purchase anything that you'd normally purchase. Just remember that you have to use my link first, then add it to your cart. Save it as a in your web browser. Use it as often as you want. Put it on your significant other's computer. Make your favorite in their browser. Add it to your parents' browser. You know, I did it to mine. For every purchase that's made there, I get approximately 4% back from Amazon. And it's all at no additional cost to you. You pay the same price and you help support the show. You can also make a straight-up donation to me via PayPal. I've got a link right on my show. Option number 3, you can buy an Instant Action Podcast t-shirt from my Spreadshirt store. I've got them in various colors and various styles. And option 4, as always, you can be a patron over on Patreon. Setting up a funding level of just $1 a month gets you access to every week's shows the day that they're recorded. So I put those up on Sunday night, and you do get early access to them. So once again, I'd love it if you guys support me and keep this show cost neutral. But with that, what's actually in store for this week's show? Well, I'm sure you guys want me to talk about everything and anything, but what I'm really all going to be able to talk about tonight is that June 12th PC game update, because it is a friggin' doozy. I mean, we've got alert changes, we've got events being added, we've got construction changes to the game with orbital strikes and routers, we have new battle rifles being added, we have a bunch of gun changes, we have vehicle changes, prowler changes, so many changes within this game update that I really don't think I'm going to have time to talk about anything else. We'll see how it goes when we get later on into the show itself, because there's a lot of stuff that I do want to talk about that happened other than this game update. But clearly, this game update's probably going to take up everything. So with that, strap in as we hot drop into another episode of the Instant Action Podcast. All right, so first up this week is the June 12th PC game update, and this is one that the devs have been teasing us for about a week now, and everybody's been wondering when this is actually going to drop. And please note, I did say PC game update because all the stuff in here has not come to PS4 yet as of this recording. I'm hoping that the majority of it comes this coming week, and then next week I'll be able to say, yes, all this stuff has come to PS4, but obviously since a lot of this, or at least some of this is construction related, and since the PS4 does not have construction yet, some of that obviously will not be making its way to PS4, but I do really hope that we see a lot of the stuff here on PC that just got dropped on June 12th making its way to PS4 in the next week or so that they're not too far behind their PC brethren. But let's jump right into this and actually talk about what we got in this update, because this is one of the biggest updates that we've had in a long time. I mean, we have pages and pages of stuff to talk about, so let's see if we can get through it. So first off, the new continent events have been added in this game update. They've been added to quote-unquote diversify gameplay, reward victories, and shape your future, which is kind of amusing. But then basically warp gates are going to stabilize. If you're playing and you're on a new warp gate, it's going to stabilize. And then they're going to enter a charging phase for a couple hours. Now, while they're in that charging state, special events are going to fire off periodically. Events are very similar to alerts, but they're much shorter, and they're not going to actually lock the continent. And the rewards that you get from them are going to be different, so will the gameplays that are kind of different from them. And so the biggest new added alert or event, got to start using the event tag, not alert tag. The biggest new event is that aerial anomalies event. And there have been countless, or I guess June 12th when the patch dropped, or the game update dropped, a number of aerial anomaly events kicked off on every continent, and just the giddy excitement on Reddit of people posting pictures, of people posting screenshots, videos of the events, and how they're just all out dogfighting insanity, which some people like, some people don't like. I've seen mixed feelings on it. I think it's pretty cool. Maybe after we've done them for a while, people will start to think that they're not as cool as they are right now. But I do think just that massive dogfight in the air over these anomalies is kind of an exciting time within the game right now. And I think the devs did a decent job pushing this out, even though there are detractors to it, because your frame rate seems to drop into the shithole during some of these, because there's just so much air that needs to be rendered and stuff like that. But I love the fact that they've decided to throw something brand new into the game for people to play over. Some of the other anomalies include, controlling all the amp stations on a continent, controlling all the tech plants on a continent, or controlling all the biolabs on a continent. And right now, those are only 30 minutes. So they're much shorter than a full meltdown, or a little bit shorter than the original meltdown. We'll get into the meltdown itself in a minute or so. But these are only 30 minutes, so they go by pretty quick. For the facility ones, if you control 2 out of the 3, then you're certainly going to win it. Obviously, if the continent only has 1 of them, it's going to be basically whoever owns it. I've been in quite a few fights now over tech plants. I think that's a really fun one. There's been some good biolab ones going on. I know some people are sick and tired of biolabs, but right now, like I said, we've got these events that are kicking off, and they're a lot of fun, and they add some real differences to the game that we haven't had in a while. So I know maybe if you've been playing Planetside 2 for a long time, the facility control alerts are kind of old hat, but I, for one, am kind of glad that they're back. Now, these events, they are pulled randomly, so you're just going to get an absolute random one. One thing to note is that if you're on a specific continent, if you have more than one continent open, if you're fighting on one in the middle of some sort of event, note that it will pop up on your screen saying another event is occurring if it's happening on another continent. I know that confused me at first. I was like, hey, we're right in the middle of meltdown. How can there be an event? And then I realized that it was happening on a different continent. So do note that will pop up even if it's not happening on the continent that you are currently on. So moving along, now we're going to talk about Meltdown, because the Meltdown has changed. So there are no longer hives in the game. Everybody's aware of that. They removed hives. So that's no longer a requirement to trigger the Meltdown alert on the continent. But basically, once the warp gates are charged, and if I recall correctly, that is it's a few hours at least. I can't remember the exact full time frame on it, but I mean, there seems to be a lot of time to have at least 3 different events kick off. So, I mean, we're definitely talking a few hours before they actually fully charge. But once the warp gates are fully charged, the first faction that reaches 41% territory control will trigger the Meltdown alert. And the Meltdown alert is now changed to a winner-take-all, completely territory control. And the other thing is these are now 90-minute alerts, so a whole hour and 30 minutes, which to me feels a little long right now. But I do think that it does add a lot of time for there to be some more strategy into the meltdown alerts. You've got a lot of pushes and back and forth, and you really need to think, or people that are directing all the traffic within the game really need to think about what lanes are being pushed, what bases are being defended, and things like that. I know on the first day I played on, I was playing on Emerald, and we had the meltdown alert go off on Hassan, and NC triggered it, and we had plenty of territory to do this and ended up actually losing it because VS came and pushed us out and kicked our butts and ended up winning the alert. An interesting thing that now, though, with these meltdown alerts is that you do get quite a bit of certs and ISO 4 from winning it. I know I was very surprised, and it's not something that was even listed in the patch notes, that even the losers get quite a bit of certs and quite a bit of ISO 4. Like, for example, when I lost the alert, I still got 150 certs and 100 ISO 4, and I got a decal as well. And I know other people were reporting that when they won, they got 300 ISO, 250 certs, and a decal or a reward drop as well. And the second place people got 200 ISO, 150 certs, and a reward drop. So certainly they're definitely giving out some increased awards for even the losers of the alert. And the other funny thing is, I know a lot of people have been saying that due to some bugs with this, that they're getting like 7 to 12 different decals all at once for winning or even losing an alert. So watch for that, because that might happen to you as well. So that's events and the meltdown all kind of in a nutshell right now. I do like the fact that we get multiple events now. I do think that the meltdown alert is a little long. I mean, an hour and a half. I said it before. My main concern is that this is going to happen at like 10 o'clock at night, and I'm not going to be able to stick around and play, till 11:30 just to kind of finish an alert. So hopefully those get triggered earlier rather than later for the most part. But again, it's all based on territory control. Moving along from those changes, the Cold Tier VR got a little bit of changes as well. So basically on Cold Tier, you can now use the ESF and Valkyries on Cold Tier. Those had been disabled. And they fixed a bug where Cold Tier is no longer going to inherit the skybox of the area that a player zoned in from. They also made some Amrish lattice changes, and these changes were completely around Econom to ensure that players need to go through Econom rather than skirting around it to progress further down the lattice. So now the Augur connects to Econom Garrison and Triage. They're not connected anymore. Econom, Triage, and Motor Pool are no longer connected, and Econom Garrison and the Motor Pool are no longer connected by lattice links as well. The important thing there again is now players must funnel through the Econom Biolab. This is the construction Biolab on Amrish before they can progress further down the lane. And I agree with these changes because it felt silly that they had this in the middle, but yet you could just go around it and didn't have to fight at it. Next, construction, because there were quite a few changes. Basically, there is a major update, and its aims are to create more interaction for builders and maybe a little less frustration when attacking. So their goal was to move away from bases that can be maintained by a singular player and more towards group building mentality, requiring a lot of maintenance and support to keep them up. So starting with the cordium costs, most construction objects have received large reductions in the cordium cost to place them. I mean, we're talking about 50 to 70% on all objects. Since their focus is about maintaining, they were really trying to reduce the initial barrier to get one up and running, especially while playing with a group. They also changed around the cert pricing for unlocking the different schematics. So the repair module was reduced to 500 certs from 1,000. The Elysium spawn tube was reduced to 500 from 1,500, and the spear tower was was reduced from 500 from 1,000. They also added or made some changes to the exclusion radius. And basically what they've done there is streamlined it so that modules now are only excluded by other modules of the same type. And the module radius has been reeled in to 25 meters for all modules. And the goal here is so that there's less confusion about which modules can go where, and players can now create quote-unquote stashes full of different module types at different areas of a base instead of having to scatter them all across the base itself. Speaking of these different modules, starting off with the repair module, this no longer makes construction pieces invulnerable to damage. Instead, it now repairs structures at a reasonably fast rate. The intent of the previous version was to prevent swarms of vehicles taking down structures too quickly. And they found that an unintended side effect was that a well-designed base could take advantage of that invulnerability, and they wanted to get rid of that. So they've added new ways for bases to protect themselves from an incoming onslaught, so that the repair module is not as OP as it was previously. Moving on to building decay. Now, all structures are required to be powered by a cordium silo nearby to ensure that they don't decay, and structures that do not will decay much more quickly when they're unpowered. And basically the goal here is that if there are any rogue construction objects that were just built and completely ignored, those are going to be decaying and disappearing, so they're not just kind of stuck out there. So the goal is to make sure that people who want to continue to construct bases are able to continue to construct bases. Next up, the cordium silo. Placing this costs 2,000 cordium, and that cordium is transferred directly into the silo. The silos now slowly burn cordium over time, and the owner of it, as well as their squad mates, are going to receive a warning when the levels are below 1,000 cordium. You can no longer lock players from using your silo outright. Instead, a cordium reserve of 20,000 has been added to them, which will prevent players from accessing your silo only when that threshold is reached and your ownership settings are enabled. Silos no longer power enemy equipment as well. The silo is kind of a bone of contention through a bunch of people. This is probably the biggest complaint that I've seen so far regarding construction, besides orbital strikes, which I'll get to in a few. I've heard from many players that say the fact that the cordium silo cannot be locked just to them is not something that hardcore construction folks want, because they find that people are able to just use the cordium in the silo and not really assist them as well. And a lot of people are wondering if Daybreak Games is going to make a change to that and make it relockable. Certainly, we're going to have a wait and see effect on that. Moving along, the Hive. This is the hardline interference volume emitter. Those are gone, like we said earlier. The Hive efficiency map overlay has also been removed from the game. As for friendly fire, soft construction objects no longer receive damage from friendly fire, and hard construction objects receive 30% of damage from friendlies. Siege weapons on ants, the Howling Mining Laser and the Yellow Jacket Mining Laser now deal damage to enemy construction objects in addition to their normal mining functionality, and they're hoping that it's going to give players a risk and reward counter to heavily fortified construction bases. Moving on to the structure shield module, you can now interact with a powered module to engage the overcharge shields functionality. And what those do is they turn your large structures like walls, bunkers, and towers invulnerable to damage for a short time, which gives you a chance to repair them while they're under fire. Structure shields now also prevent splash damage from going through them as well. The vehicle gate shield, the structure shield module is no longer required to power this. It no longer requires cordium to power it, similar to a module. A single player may place up to 2 vehicle gate shields now instead of only 1. Players can no longer fire small arms through vehicle gate shields, and they've added more placements for them, placement points to prevent abuse to them. Next, the Skywall Shield Emitter. These no longer light infantry on fire. Instead, when you pass through it, your shield is going to now be EMP'd. Any vehicles passing through it, though, will receive significantly more damage than they had in the past. Next, talking about our first new item, this is the Flail, which is basically an artillery battery. What it does is it will fire a barrage of 4 anti-vehicle shells at a location designated by the player. A flail requires an AI module nearby and for the owning player to pull the targeting device for the object itself. I've seen quite a few flails being built in the game, but I haven't seen many of them actually being used, especially not compared to the orbital strike. Next, the spire structure types. So the routing spire and pane spire have both been added to the construction system. They're listed under the tactical category grouping. Spires are similar to modules. They're vulnerable to small arms fire, and they do share the exclusion radius with any other spires. Now, the first one is that pane spire, and what that will do is deal damage over time to nearby infantry and max units within 15 meters while it's powered. They suggest placing it near an object you want to keep infantry out of or away from, like an infantry tower or a pillbox. The next and one of the biggest ones is the routing spire. Now, when that's powered, an owner can access the spire to equip a router deployable device. It acts as a deployable spawn that can be placed indoors within lattice bases and allows a public respawn access to players within 100 meters of it. If the routing spire loses power or is destroyed, the router will be destroyed as well. Again, that's a big one. Note that you are able to small arms the router pad that people do place down to kind of get rid of them. One thing to realize, though, with the router right now, when you place that pad, whoever places it, you are not going to get huge amounts of XP like people who deploy a Sunderer do. I'm hoping that that's something that gets changed when they do another pass on XP. I know Drew said he wants to do a pass on the XP, and I do think that if someone's willing to put the time in to get a routing spire up, get a router, and put it somewhere that gets a lot of use, that they should be getting a ton of XP just like someone who places a good Sunderer. Next, the final spire, and the one that seems to, or those with all the spires, but the final construction piece that people seem to kind of have the most love or hate relationship with is the new orbital strike. Because now the orbital strike can be called down on lattice bases. If you're indoors, you may be knocked back and potentially receive damage from the collision, but you should receive no direct damage from the strike itself. Now, the orbital strikes now charge to a maximum range in 15 minutes. That's down from an hour. They can no longer be fired when a silo is completely drained. And if you blow up an orbital strike, or the orbital strike now creates a large explosion upon its death. And they did fix some issues where the chassis could become practically indestructible. Now, I know it's a big love and hate relationship with the orbital strike. I've seen a lot of people, and I'm going to give a shout out to FedEx right now on Emerald because I know they seem to be the ones using it the most. They're building bases, getting orbital strikes up and ready, launching orbital strikes. I've seen them having somebody in a Valkyrie, dropping an orbital strike on very vulnerable positions and killing a lot of people. I've seen a ton of orbital strikes in the game, and it's really changed some of the play style within the game itself. And I think it's for good because it now feels like the original orbital strike in the original Planetside, something that was very iconic for the game. Granted, in the original, you had to rank up your command rank in order to be able to use it. But I do like that orbital strikes can be called down on lattice bases. It really breaks up zerging. It breaks up a stalemate between two forces. Used tactically, it's a great option within the game itself, and I'm very happy to see what it does. Now, granted, when you get killed by it, you kind of swear and you're pissed off and everything like that, but you got to realize, get your ass indoors and you're not going to take damage from it. Now, I do know a lot of players have been experiencing issues with that where they are getting indoors, but they're still taking damage. I'm guessing that's probably client-side related, because when I've gotten myself indoors every time, I've taken no damage. Yes, I've been knocked back. My screen goes completely white. I get the goggles. They do nothing. Notification on the screen and stuff like that. But I do think orbital strikes are an excellent and awesome addition, because they really do change the flow of battle within the game itself. And the smart outfits that are using them to their full potential are going to push other people to do it. And now it's forcing other groups of people to actively hunt down the orbital strike construction object and killing it. And, there's a lot of bases out there that are getting attacked because they need to be stopped to prevent orbital strikes from being rained down on people constantly. So that seems to be a good niche thing for maybe a smaller outfit to kind of take upon themselves. They could certainly be a hunter-killer team that are taking out orbital strikes and routing spires and things like that, that are helping the enemy forces within the game itself. Moving on to air pads and vehicle pads, they now provide ammunition for air vehicles. Constructed air pads and vehicle pads can be locked from use, and they're going to adhere to the Silo's Cordium Reserve rules. The Hoplon anti-air turret will no longer attack or track or acquire targets past 500 meters when affected by an AI module. The Xiphos anti-infantry turret, their cone of fire when affected by an AI module has been increased. And then we've got a couple miscellaneous construction changes. So nanite costs have been removed from vehicles spawned from construction bases. They did a reorg of all the construction objects in the Ant and Cordium silo terminals. Spitfire turrets should no longer target enemies through construction objects, and a couple other things, a couple minor bugs that they fixed out of that. Again, a lot of construction stuff. And I do have to say, construction with these changes, and specifically with the orbital strike, the flail, and the router, really feel like they're being enmeshed within gameplay itself. Whereas construction really felt like its own thing. And sure, hives kind of were the one thing to help kick off alerts. But again, just those three things alone really kind of mesh construction with the rest of the game itself. And I do like the direction of those changes. Moving on, though, let's talk about squad changes. And these are just some minor changes because there is going to be a greater look at squads in the next update that they're going to push out. So a lot of these were things that I've talked about in the past few weeks' shows. Single-player squads are no longer going to be disbanded when a second squad member joins and then leaves. Squad leaders receive an error sound when doing an invalid squad action. Newly promoted squad, platoon, and fire team leaders get a message on their center of the screen notifying them. Using the squad create button, immediately post your squad with enabled recruitment and a default recruitment message. Squad beacons are only appearing in the squad leader's loadout when you have at least 2 squad members. The /squad promote me option is now, you can bind that. And everybody I know seems to be binding that to the apostrophe button. That's the one right next to the enter key. That shares the key with the quotation marks. At least that's everybody I've talked to seems to be binding it to that one. It's kind of out of the way, not something that you're going to accidentally press. I'm curious what other people are kind of using on that one. Again, those are just the small squad changes that got pushed through into this update itself. Next, there were some UI improvements in this game update. The implant screen received a new look, including new upgrade and breakdown animations. It also helped fix a lot of the old bugs and pop-ups that were blocking your ability to see things and do things within the game itself. They also added the option to filter implants by owned and unowned on the loadout screen. They added a toggle for motion blur within the graphics setting page. They do want you to know that it is a performance-intensive feature, and it only works when your graphical settings are either high or ultra, and it may cause visual artifacts when interacting with different gameplay shaders, so to use it at your own risk. Next, a big one that a lot of people were asking for, cooldown timers for vehicles will now display in both first and third person, and they're going to replace the flashing waiting message that you would normally see when the ability was on cooldown. I can't tell you how huge of a fix that is. I mean, the waiting was just, I'm always mashing that button, to try and repair my vehicle. And it just constantly says waiting. Now you actually know how much time you have left before you can use that special ability again. Some other miscellaneous UI changes and fixes. The / key can now be rebound, and the characters create screens, graphics, and audio settings are now in parity with those in game. And comparing weapons in the loadout screen will no longer show the comparison prompt when selecting attachments. Moving on to infantry, and with the length of this is going to be the entire show this week, and I'm going to have to talk about the dev live stream on next week's show. But first, with infantry, new weapons came out. So if you weren't aware, the new set of battle rifles have arrived on Araxis. These weapons are quote-unquote slow. They're focusing on slow paced shots with high accuracy at medium to long range. They're available for all non-light assault infantry classes, and each of them has a fully loaded bundle in the depot. The Terran Republic's battle rifle is the MG HBR-1 Dragoon, and it is a fully automatic battle rifle. The MGR M1 Bishop is the new conglomerate battle rifle, and that is the one that has the special rounds which can pass through multiple infantry targets, dealing damage along the way. And the Vanu Sovereignty get the VELR Obelisk, which is a heat-based weapon which is casting aside traditional ammo while retaining versatility and damage. I have not had a chance to play with these yet, but I know there are a lot of complaints currently with the Dragoon and its play. A lot of people like the Obelisk, from what I hear, who play Vanu, and the Bishop. I've heard different things about the Bishop. Some people love it. Some people don't really care too much for it. I guess it all depends on what faction you're playing. Moving on to other infantry things, though. The Resto Kit, its healing is no longer going to stack with the Combat Medic's Nano Regen device, and the description was also updated to reflect that the effect heals 70 health per second for 12 seconds. And I know this was kind of also put in place to kind of nerf Carapace as well. Next, C4, it had its detonator changed to an updated model, and the Araxium also used an Araxium variant of its model as well. C4 also has a new icon, and also the biggest change is that C4 now has a 0.5 second delay before the trigger press completes, and that's kind of to try and combat the fact that people can just throw C4 and detonate it instantaneously and not give anybody any sort of chance to get out of the way. I'm kind of happy with those new changes. I'm still throwing bounties on anybody that kills me with C4. Next, we have some other weapon updates. First, the Blackhand pistol got its max damage range moved out to 20 meters. It was proposed in an early update but never made it to live, so they're just a little housekeeping on that one. The Eidolon, the Warden, the AMR-66, the Revenant, the Guardian, and the DMR-99, these are all various battle rifles. They got their maximum ADS cone of fire changed in all states from 3 to 0.3. They had their minimum changed from 0.25 to 0.15. They had their recovery rate changed from 20 to 100. And the goal was to make them feel a bit more snappy and less punishing when maximizing their rates of fire. The 99 SV and the Gauss SPR, the semi-auto sniper rifles, they had their maximum ADS cone of fire changed from 2 to 0.15. Their recovery fire rates while standing or crouching from 20 to 100. Their cone of fire bloom, or ADS cone of fire bloom from 0.8 to 0.15. Maximum damage pushed out to 50 meters. Minimum damage pushed out to 150 meters. The VA-39 Spectre had its minimum ADS cone of fire from 2 to 0.15. ADS cone of fire recovery from 20 to 100. Maximum damage range from 8 to 50 meters. ADS cone of fire bloom from 0.8 to 0.15. Again, all these, the semi-auto sniper rifles, just some changes to them as well. Miscellaneous infantry changes and fix. Reserve hard light barrier can now be repaired. It also now can't be used without first unlocking it. And there were a couple other things like the medical kit's description now states that it restores 500 health. The Combat Medic's nano regen device now states its heal rate and effective range. Carapace now works with the regeneration implant. Again, some other miscellaneous changes and fixes. Moving on, though, let's talk about vehicles, because there were also some vehicle changes in this game update. First, the anchor mode on the Prowler is now integrated by default, and any certs that you spent on it have been refunded. It no longer increases your reload speed, and instead it adds a velocity bonus, which is increased from 30 to 50%. The Prowler ability that replaced it is now called Barrage, and it's an option within the utility slot. While it's active, the Prowler's main cannon reload speed is increased by 30% for a period of time. This ability can be used while the vehicle is moving or in conjunction with anchored mode. And really, the devs felt that by integrating it, it lends some more faction flavor to the Prowler while giving the Prowler a more versatile Empire ability at the same time. Moving on to top guns for the Prowler and also the Harasser, the MR-11 Gatekeeper had its minimum velocity bumped out to 300, its reload speed increased to 3,200, its damage increased to 100, and its cone of fire maximum for Harassers reduced to 0.35. The goal there was to bump up the alpha damage and reload times to quicken its time to kill against other main battle tanks by 2.5 seconds, while keeping the Harassers at about the same. Also, by removing the projectile acceleration, it should make it easier to deliver a full payload over longer distances. The cone of fire buff for the Harasser version should push its effective range a bit closer to the Prowler's, but overall the weapon will still have less effective range and reliability than a skillful halberd user, but should have stronger hard benefits for its intended role. Next, for the Mag Rider and Harasser, the Aphelion had its max damage pushed out to 40 meters and minimum to 80 meters for the Mag Riders. For the Harasser, it had it pushed out to 25 for max and 75 for minimum. Also on the Harasser, the minimum damage was increased to 143. Also, the Aphelion's crescent beams now pierce through vehicles and infantry, passing through up to 2 targets total. Obviously, this is very similar to the pass-through ability of the Bishop. Crescent's Waves no longer has any damage fallout. It now deals 800 damage at all ranges. And its lifespan was changed from 7 seconds to 1 second, which limits its range to 300 meters. Next, the Vulcan, which is also the Prowler in the TR, and the Harasser. The max damage range was increased to 25 meters, minimum to 100 meters on the Harasser. Max damage was increased to 40 meters and minimum to 100 on the Prowler. The maximum refire rate went from 100 milliseconds to 80 milliseconds after 1 second. And this is like the Aphelion. The max range was extended to allow for more damage output at typical engagement ranges. Next, the Enforcer. This is for the Vanguard and NC's Harasser. Its direct damage was increased to 325 on the Vanguard, also to 325 on the Harasser. The projectile max velocity went from 300 down to 250 on the Harasser. Its gravity went to 6 on the Harasser. Its mag size went to 7 on the Harasser down, and its ammo capacity went down to 77 on the Harasser. And the dev note for this is that the Enforcer's damage on both Harasser and Vanguard have been equalized and improved. Its effective range has been, on the Harasser at least, has been reduced to compensate for the damage increase, similar to most other top-mounted Harasser weapons versus their main battle tank counterparts. They've also increased the overall damage to give the Enforcer harder hits and stronger synergy with directional damage bonuses. With the changes that they made, 7 Enforcer rockets can destroy a Harasser without composite armor and bring a main battle tank to burning with the same number of shots to the rear. Next, the Mjolnir on the Vanguard and the Harasser, the NC Harasser, they reduce the projectile velocity down to 200, and other than that, it's retained its effectiveness beyond the additional range, and the velocity adjustment helps reel in the range without having to debuff any cone of fire attributes. So now, and the other miscellaneous vehicle changes and fixes, pulling a vehicle now places a 30-second cooldown from another being pulled again, so no longer will you be able to roll a vehicle out, accidentally get blown up by tank mines, and then immediately pull another one. You do have to wait for 30 seconds. They did remove the VR training dummies from the threat detection optics target list. Don't know how important that was. They did fix the Galaxy's nanite proximity repair system once again so that it heals properly. And finally, they reduced the C-75 Viper on the Lightning so that it's splash damage visuals with ones that are more in line with its actual area of effect. So that covers all the vehicle changes that they dropped in. They also added some new stuff to the player studio. So Steve All's VS Skyfall Light Assault Armor is now there. Fuzzbucket's Babylon Magrider plating is there. And the Hums R3 Infantry and Max helmets are now in the depot. Go check those out. I particularly like the Hums Arthurian helmets. They look really nice. Definitely check those out if you're curious. And finally, just to kind of bring this patch and I guess this week's show kind of to a close with so much stuff, we have a number of other miscellaneous changes and fixes. I'm not going to go through all of them. The biggest ones that I pulled out here and I kind of bolded for myself is that the total number of purchasable character slots has been increased from 4 to 6. What that change allows is a player to own up to 12 characters total on a single account now. So if you ever wanted to create more and more characters, you can purchase a bunch more character slots. Also, players will now remain invulnerable until their loading screen drops. So that's kind of good if you won't wind up dead before you're done loading. And kind of a big one, any players that are battle rank 15 or lower are no longer going to be subject to continent or faction population queues. And that's kind of one of the bigger things within this game update. That's really geared towards newer players or somebody who creates a new character. You're going to be able to kind of get around some of these population queues and get quickly into the fight itself, which I think is a really good thing to ensure that newer players kind of don't get screwed by that. And I'm assuming an unintended consequence of that is that once somebody hits BR16 and starts being subjected to these, maybe they're going to say, geez, I should buy membership to kind of continue to get around that. It could be a valuable perk for somebody who hasn't been subjected to it before. So that is the entire June 12th PC game update. And it was a friggin' doozy. And that's why I really don't have time to talk about anything else on this week's show. And I mean, I have a ton of stuff I want to talk about. We've got the fact that we had a dev live stream that showed off a lot of this stuff and a lot of summer stuff that's coming up. So I'm going to have to push that to next week's show. They also gave us a preview of the Spawn revamp design document that I want to talk about. And also even some stuff in the live stream, like the fact that Bastion fleet carriers, they were playing around with those. Again, I'm going to push a lot of that stuff to next week's show. So I apologize. They drop a huge game update on me and then don't even wait a week to do a dev live stream. So like I said, this show is already a longer show this week and we'll get to it next week. I do apologize. So with that, Only one topic. Let's move into housekeeping this week.
Housekeeping. Housekeeping.
Come back later, please.
Housekeeping.
Not now.
Housekeeping.
Go away.
I coming anyway?
All right, I did get one email, and it was from Louis this week, and he wrote, "Hey, Deringer, Louis here, and welcome to Cordiumside. I've been spending the last few days trying out all the new construction improvements and been enjoying most of the changes. Problem is I don't get to enjoy it as much as I'd like to because I'm always out collecting cordium. The increased drain to the bases, comboed with the fact that they force you to make your silo public, is a big problem. If you fill your silo over 20,000, other players just come up to it and do one of three things. A, purchase and place stuff all around your base. Pain, because most public players don't know how to build, and this also increases the drain on the silo. Or B, they swing by with their aunt, buy something for their base, and drive off. Or C, they purchase things over and over without even placing them for the sole purpose of just draining your silo. So add all that to an increased residual drain to the silo, and bam, a fun-filled night of gathering resources. Woohoo, Cordiumside. The 20,000 limit they added so people can't drain under it does not help. After 20,000, it's not long after before your base is in dire need of more cordium. It's easier to just put up a silo with just an orbital strike next to it and no defenses. It just takes a few minutes, and if it gets destroyed, oh well, just build another. With the soon-to-be fixed orbital increased growth speed, it's not a loss. Also, before anyone draws any conclusions, no, I'm not solo building. I play with a small squad of 5 to 7 guys, which in my opinion should be plenty to manage a base. If the devs thought a full squad of guys would work on a base just so one guy can orbital strike and have all the fun, they are crazy. Sadly, this was already a problem when the silos were lockable. Players from other factions would log into our faction, join our squad, and drain our silos. So all you orbital haters now know exactly what to do. I've not complained about it publicly before because I didn't want to make the problem worse, but I have told the devs who, instead of fixing it, made the silos public and made it even worse. Thanks for reading my rant. Love, Louis. Yeah, Louis, like I said, I mentioned it earlier in the show, the fact that silos can't be locked. You were one of the most vocal people when I was saying people are complaining about it to me, and I think that you've kind of covered it all there in a nutshell. Interesting, though, I hadn't thought outside the box that if I was a real dick, I could just switch factions, drive an ant over to your silo, and just start draining the hell out of it and screw you over with that. And I wonder if more people are going to consider doing that. It could be a new complaint that we see on Reddit constantly. But I think everything that you say there is kind of a spot on, and hopefully the devs will think about it. I do think locking silos again might not be a bad idea within the game. But again, thank you for the email, Louis. That is going to be it for this week's show, though. But how can you get in touch with me or the show? Well, first off, visit my website, www.instantactionpodcast.com. Email me like Louis did, instantactionshow@gmail.com. Call me, leave me a voicemail, 347-4VM-4PS2, or that number is 347-486-4772. You can always follow the show on Twitter. It's at InstActPodcast, or my personal Twitter, which is at The Derringer. But in closing, if you've enjoyed the show, please leave me a review on your podcast listening avenue of choice, whether it's iTunes, Stitcher, Google Play, or anywhere else. Also, feel free to tell your friends and outfit mates about the show. And finally, thanks for listening, and keep spamming that Join Combat, formerly known as Instant Action button.
Get your arms combined.